So, what a weekend we just had in terms of college football news related to the transfer portal. And especially if you're a fan of the Pac 12, where several Pac teams, including Utah, USC, and the Colorado Buffaloes, all got active in the transfer portal. And today, we need to ask the question: did it move the needle? Before we can jump into all of that, y'all know the drill. I need to hear from you. Hop down to the comments. Give me a Y for yes or an N for no. Do you find these to be compelling additions for these teams? And let me know what you're thinking. If you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe. Hit that bell notification as I do constant college football content. You don't want to miss any of it. And if you enjoyed the content, be sure to like and comment down below. Those interactions seem small. They are massive to content creators such as myself, and we're on a push to 20,000 subscribers. I'd love to have you a part of this unbelievable community. But having said all that, let's jump right into this. And I want to start with Utah, because if you've been around the channel, if you've watched some of my live streams, you've probably heard me talk about the Utes before, and I think they're one of the more underappreciated teams on the national scale. Year in, year out, Kyle Whittingham has them ready to go, and I'm super intrigued to see what they're going to be able to do in the Pac-12 this year, especially when I saw them getting active in the transfer portal this weekend. Because whenever we take a dive into the Utah Utes going into 2023, them going out and getting a former Florida State Seminole wide receiver in Micah Pittman, it makes sense to me. And the reason is quite simple. They lost Dalton Kincaid to the NFL, and Dalton Kincaid was their leading receiver on the team. Now, though Dalton Kincaid is a tight end, to me, it's all about mitigating the loss, trying to get as many weapons as you can so that you feel like, hey, our wide receiving core, it's solid. We have several guys we have faith in, and though we may not have Dalton Kincaid, we feel like we can mitigate that loss with several different bodies. To me, that's the name of the game for Utah. So for Utah, I absolutely understand this move. Micah Pittman was someone who has legitimate college football experience, having played for Florida State since 2019. And one of the things I talk about all of the time in relation to transfer portal are some of the benefits you can get out the transfer portal that you just simply can't get in high school recruiting. And the primary benefit is experience. So I do find this to be a compelling addition for Utah. I think it's good that they're getting active in the transfer portal, and it even makes me more excited to see what they're going to be able to do this upcoming season. But we can't talk about the Utah Utes and what they're going to do in the Pac-12 without mentioning USC. Those two storylines are going to be intertwined this season, and I, for one, cannot wait. But it makes it even more exciting whenever we have a weekend where we can talk about Utah getting active in the portal, where we must also talk about USC getting active in the portal. Because Utah was not the only Pac-12 team to go out there and get some big-time additions. Because USC not only got a win in the transfer portal, but they got a big-time win in recruiting as well, and we're going to break them both down. But we've got to start in the transfer portal, where former Alabama Crimson Tide defensive back Traquan Fegans transfers from Alabama to USC. And for me, anytime USC can go out there and get defensive additions, I think that's a good thing for USC fans, and I'd imagine USC fans are excited. Traquan Fegans, coming out of high school, was a blue-chip prospect, a prospect several institutions wanted, including Miami and the Alabama Crimson Tide, and it was a really fun battle to see him choose between those two schools. Ultimately, it was the Crimson Tide that got the commitment. And this past year, Traquan Fegans didn't see any action in games, but what that does mean is he goes to USC with 4 years of eligibility left. And if you're Coach Williams, I'm super intrigued to see what this USC secondary is going to look like this year. Another year in the system for Alex Grinch, and the biggest question everyone around college football has for the Trojans: what is your defense going to look like? So anytime you can go out there and get a defensive addition, I do think it's going to be interesting. And of course, I think it's going to excite the fan base of the Trojans, because that's their biggest question right now. Nobody in their right mind is questioning what the USC offense is going to look like whenever they have Lincoln Riley and return Caleb Williams, who looks to be the number one quarterback taken in the draft and the number one pick in the draft. Let's be very honest here. So I do think this is an interesting addition, but it gets even more interesting when we really step back and take a look at the ripple effects from this transfer. Because whenever Traquan Fegans announced he was going into the transfer portal, I was interested to see what that would mean for the recruiting process of his younger brother, Anquan Fegans, who's a 5-star prospect in the class of 2025 and a top 30 player regardless of position, but he plays the safety position. Well, lo and behold, not long after Traquan Fegans announced his intention to play for USC, Anquan Fegans committed to the Trojans. So not only does USC get a former blue chip defensive back. They get a former blue chip defensive back that was coached by Nick Saban, and I'm not going to go into a whole giant soliloquy as to what that means. If you're a college football fan, you know what that means. Just go look in the NFL, look at how many defensive backs have a connection to Nick Saban. They're littered all throughout the NFL, and the cherry on top is that you get a commitment from a guy in the class of 2025 who's not only a 5-star, but also plays on the defensive side of the ball, where his older brother is set to play for you, and that just so happens to be the biggest question for USC going into 2023. So I'm interested to see what this means for that Trojan defense. I think that this is going to be an area where all college football fans are watching closely, and personally, I can't wait for the season to kick off so we can see. And finally, we need to turn our attention to the Colorado Buffaloes, where at this point, I don't think anybody is surprised to see Coach Prime in Colorado getting wins out the transfer portal. What does interest me, though, is the entire way the Buffaloes have restructured their roster, because we haven't seen anything to this extent, and I've talked about that time and time again. And if any of you have been around the content before, you know anytime there's a situation where multiple commitments happen, if any of those players play along the offensive or defensive line, we start in the trenches. And we're going to start with the offensive line today, where Colorado gets another addition, this time former Liberty offensive lineman Reggie Young. And one thing we just talked about is the ability to generate depth, and especially along that offensive line. Because whenever Colorado started making all these additions and changes via the transfer portal, so many of you would ask the question to me, what about the trenches? What's the offensive line going to look like? What's the defensive line going to look like? Well, Coach Prime and the staff agree, and that's why they've been cognizant to continue adding in depth both on the offensive line and the defensive line. Because right now we're sitting here talking about Reggie Young transferring from Liberty to Colorado, but the next thing we need to talk about is defensive lineman Bishop Thomas, another Florida State Seminole who finds his way from Florida State to Colorado with Coach Prime. So this shows us that this staff realizes they need the depth in the trenches, and they're going out and doing something about it. Now, Bishop Thomas is an intriguing addition to me because he still has eligibility. He doesn't have a ton of experience, only having played in one game per ESPN, which was Boston College, but he does have a lot of eligibility left. And he stands 6'2", just under 300 pounds. I think this is an interesting addition. I'm really excited to see what this means for Colorado's defensive line and whether or not Bishop Thomas can be someone that really makes a difference for that unit. So I really like that addition for Colorado. But Reggie Young and Bishop Thomas were not the only additions Colorado got. Far from it. Keeping on the defensive side of the football, we need to talk about another defensive back they added in from Southern Utah, this time safety Roderick Ward. And Roderick Ward is someone that had really positive experience in 2023, even going as far as to being named first team All-Western Athletic Conference. He notched several interceptions for Southern Utah, and this is a guy that I think Colorado fans are going to be very excited they add in. I'm interested to see how he shakes up that defensive back room. And that's one area where I think most fans, regardless of who they root for, will say, okay, that's an area where Colorado has several pieces we're excited to see. I don't think you roll out a defensive backfield that includes Travis Hunter and Kermani McLean and people not be excited to watch it. I know for one, I am very excited to watch it, and all of these additions, especially a guy that has this type of experience, that has this type of production, I think that's a compelling factor because it really highlights what we started talking about. The transfer portal allows you to get guys that have legitimate college football experience, something you just can't do absent the portal. And finally, ping-ponging back to the offensive side of the football, they pick up another wide receiver, this time Jalen Ellis, a former Baylor Bear who had committed to West Virginia originally out the transfer portal, but flipped that commitment from West Virginia to Colorado. And Colorado has been in talks with several other wide receiver prospects in the transfer portal. I'm super intrigued to see what the Sean Lewis offense is going to look like with Shedeur Sanders at the helm, and especially with Brett Bartolone as the wide receiver coach there, Brett Bartolone being the former offensive coordinator for Coach Prime at JSU, where they put up big-time numbers now. That offense, I think, is going to be really fun. When we do deep dives into what Kent State did with Sean Lewis as the head coach, that's an offense that likes to move really, really fast. They've gotten some running backs out the transfer portal that I'm interested in watching in a Cavassier smoke. They're after an Alton McCaskill, which would be a huge addition out the transfer portal. They got Dylan Edwards in the recruiting class. But any offensive weapons they can get, I think they're excited to do so. And whenever we look at Jalen Ellis, though he may not have a ton in terms of production, he stands 6'3", 184 pounds. And when we look at what he was able to do this season, on 4 receptions, he went for over 150 yards, 1 touchdown, and averaged 51.3 yards per reception, which is just insane. But at the end of the day, I can't wait to hear from all of you. The transfer portal has really changed the way rosters can be built and rebuilt, and one of the things that's intrigued me the most about the roster building at Colorado under Coach Prime is because of how much work they're having to do in the transfer portal. I talked about this already in the video, but I do think it's such a great point to end on. So many instances and so many times in the transfer portal, these kids are transferring from a situation where a lot of the times they want playing time. And whenever you have a roster rebuild like this, it's really impressive to win these recruiting pitches, not by saying, hey, you're going to be guaranteed playing time, but by saying, come be a part of what we're building. Super interested to see what it all means for Colorado. I can't wait for the season to get here to see how it all rolls out for Coach Prime and the Buffaloes. But great additions all around for the Pac-12 teams. They were not alone. Auburn put in some good work getting a former Ohio State wide receiver. They need help on that offensive side of the ball after getting former Michigan State quarterback Peyton Thorne. We talked about that on the live on Friday. But the transfer portal still has some surprises left, and you already know we're going to be right here to talk about it all as they come down. Can't wait to hear from all of you. Hop down to the comments. Let me know what you're thinking. That's it. See ya.